estate. So, is anybody in here thinking about getting a real estate license? Just curious. A few people. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, good. Maybe 4. All right. So, again, that's not what this lesson's all about. But real estate is a great industry. I've been in real estate since I was 18. I bought my first duplex when I was 18 years old with no money down. I had to take a little loan from my parents and bought an FHA assumable loan, which they don't basically do anymore. Fixed it up, had kind of a loser tenant, got a guitar as rent, part of the rent payment. He moved out. Then I sold it on contract and made $12,000 at age 18 on my first deal. And then about a year or so later, the people I sold it to defaulted on their contract, and I ended up incurring about a $3,000 loss. So I went from a $12,000 profit to a $3,000 loss, and so that was my early lessons in real estate. So I went on to get my broker's or real estate license, sold a lot of property, sold $1 million worth of real estate my first year. And then went and got my broker's license, had about 3 sales agents under me. That was just kind of a little side gig. So if you're interested in real estate, getting a real estate license is a good way to get involved with it and get involved with rental property and some other things. So we got lots of fun things to go through. I'm going to give you some of my tips and worksheets on analyzing real estate investments. So that'll be a little bit of bonus material for the real estate chapter, and I'll share that with you too. So let's go ahead and get started on the first section here. We'll continue on with the more real estate stuff. I'm going to do a little exercise that's related to your homework tonight. So you can pull out your phone to use as a calculator if you want, and on airplane mode for me. All right, so we got a little budgeting exercise since we're at the end of our class almost here. So let's go ahead and figure this out. You can talk to your neighbor if you want. So we're going to go through this budgeting activity. This is kind of the first part. Assume your first job after college pays $40,000 a year. Compute your bi-monthly net income by answering the following questions. You got $40,000 a year, some federal income taxes, Social Security, Medicare, payroll taxes. What is your net annual take-home pay? Factor out the taxes and deductions from your gross annual income. And then you can just continue on with 2, 3, and 4. What's that? What would be in your zero-based budget? So identify 3 budget items for your zero-based budget, just 3. I mean, they're trying to say items that you need to survive, just to get your juices flowing.
So, like, the 3 budgetary items, like, you know, like insurance, like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But try to pick things that you need to survive and live. I'm just doing 3. Just to get your juices flowing. Okay, so what did you guys get for number 1? 36,000 after you net that out. And then monthly take home. 3,000 what? 3,000? 3,000 even. Determine your amount of net take home pay you receive. How much are we getting? 1,500. All right. So that is just kind of the very first step to this to tonight's exercise. So here's what you've got. It's called the zero-based budget exercise with Excel. Zero-based budget exercise with Excel. And when you click that, it'll bring you to this sheet. This first attachment is what you already did. So that's what we just did in class. And then the second and third will be downloads that you'll do. And the first one is kind of the instructions. It's a Word document. And the second one is an Excel spreadsheet. Now, I wanted to warn you, because I think some kids got messed up on this. When you open up the spreadsheet, unfortunately, this comes up first. But that's not really the one we're actually doing. So make sure you just switch over to the next tab, cash flow and allocated spending. And so this is where you'll be entering in some answers here for your $3,000 budget, $1,500 for the first paycheck, $1,500 for the second paycheck. So you can kind of be thinking about, over the course of a month, how am I allocating my money across the two paychecks, which is what we did way back in chapter 2, I think, was the allocated spending sheet. All right, so what are we doing? Well, you're going to come back to this sheet, and let me blow this up a little bit. So this is going to give you practice for when you're out of here. So how many of you have worked with Microsoft Excel before? Okay. So it's pretty user-friendly. And you probably use Google Sheets or something like that. But this thing's going to walk you through. One of your things you should really work on before you get out of university with your degree is that you know Excel proficiently. Not just been exposed to it and did what we're doing in class, but actually learn how to write the formulas that are on here. Do yourself a favor, because almost every small business that you go to work for, like this little formula up here is taking the difference between those two. And so it's C82 minus C81. Excel is just a big calculator is what it is. It's just a big calculator. And for what our purposes are today is not to have you learn the ins and outs of Excel. This is just separate advice I'm giving you, that you will be much more marketable if you know how to use Excel. So during your time here, some of you are in different places on your degree. Take every opportunity to try to use some Excel and learn it if you can. We have a new quant class in the business school that is going to give you an introduction and some kind of hands-on stuff using Excel as well. So you can look for opportunities like that. All right, so for this purpose though, you're going to be creating the zero-based budget. Insert the proper amounts into the lavender with columns D and E. So Excel is listed with columns across the top, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. So when we think about trying to find a cell that we're going to enter some information into, this is at, see how they highlighted D16. So in cell D16, you'll enter in some information. Basically, anything that has a formula in it, you won't be entering in. Those are already fixed. So I'm not asking you to enter formulas, but as you enter in your mortgage insurance, and let's say that's $66, did you see how this went down to $14.34? So again, Excel is just automatically doing the calculations for you. That's the beauty of it. It's just like an app, if you want to think of it that way, but you have full control, whereas an app has been designed by a computer programmer where you put in the number and then it tells it where to go. You have freedom to kind of say, oh, I want that data to be here or here, and you can manipulate it. So it's a really good tool to be aware of. So then you'll kind of fill in this budget as you go. So total allocated budget 0. So at the bottom, ultimately we're trying to get to a zero-based budget. So you saw we had student loans, medical care, recreation, debts. And then at the bottom, it's going to start counting up, like there's the $66 that I did. There was $3,000 total income, and now there's $29.34. Zero-based budget, you're going to be driving this down to 0. Questions on that? All right, so then on the assignment here, step 1, Here's your annual pay that you guys just did. And then you're going to kind of live your life with different scenarios. So do you plan to give to others? If so, enter the amount. Charitable giving, they might suggest 10% to 15%, but it's your choice. If you don't want to give, put a 0 in there if you want. All I'm going to be looking for is that you guys got work through and approach each of these amounts, and you can kind of pretend like it's really your 40,000, right? So I want it to be more personal, since as we're wrapping up our last week of personal finance. That's what we want to do. Emergency funds, retirement funds. So let me here. You can pick one. So this is housing. Everyone needs shelter, of course. Option A, 1-bedroom apartment, 5 minutes from work, nicer amenities. Rent is $900 a month, estimated monthly. Option B, a 1-bedroom apartment, further from work, no amenities, a little cheaper. Option C, 4-bedroom apartment, 3 roommates, and that ends up being $300 a month. You guys are picking one of those that you think suits you. Like, oh, I really can't wait to have my own apartment and live by myself because I hate my roommates and I hate the dorm. And, then figure out, you can take option A or you can take option B. But then, of course, that's going to be, you're making a choice there on the 900 or the 750, and that'll free up more or less money as you go through. Cable, go without or have cable, transportation options, oil, gas, student loans. So it kind of gives you some idea of numbers on if you have a student loan. So plug that in. Toiletries, items, pet care. How many of you want to have a pet? Okay, so pet care, you're going to end up putting in some budget items for that. Be careful with pets. They tend to damage rental properties. So I just did a checkout of my tenant. One of my houses is turning over, and that dog, I had a brand new screen door. I kind of spent money. You guys know those roller screens where you pull it down and the screen just kind of magically appears, the glass goes in. That's a nicer door. I put a nicer door on this. Frickin' the first tenant that basically got to use the door, maybe it was the second tenant. Big dog, tears out the screen. I go to the local screen place, and they said, you're better off just buying a new door, because the screen is so hard to get out, like the labor and the materials to put in the new roller screen, just buy a new door. So that's a $300 deal for that tenant. That's what it's going to pay for the whole brand new door. Just checking them out today on top of, and then there was a damaged screen from the dog. So, and then I charge $25 extra per pet per month. We're going to get into the lease here in a second. When you want a pet, that's fine. Just budget for it, right? Zero-based budget will say, I'm going to give up a coffee or a restaurant to have Rover. That's fine. Just kind of go in it, eyes wide open. Gym membership, credit cards, child outlays, miscellaneous. So basically work through all of those 28 items. Just read them, and then you start building this, and you'll start to get kind of comfortable on how the worksheet works to make a zero-based budget. And then you'll have this, you can download it to your computer, and this could be the start of a little budget that you can use yourself if you want. Okay, any questions or comments there? So that's due tonight. And it doesn't, once you get into it, it doesn't take real long, but that is your homework for tonight. All right, so now, speaking of leases, let's go ahead and look at your lease that you have in front of you. So understanding a lease. How many of you are under a lease right now? You live off campus and you're got a landlord or whatever, so just 2 of you? Okay, so a lot of times tenants will do what we do with a lot of fine print and, not really look at, not really read all this. So what we're going to do today is read it. How many of you plan on living off campus sometime during your time at OU? So most of you, by the time you get senior year, you're ready to go maybe get some roommates and do something. So what I want you to do for starters is on the front, I want you to put Joe Public and then put your name first and last. Your name first and last, and then one of your close friends, first and last name for your friend. So it's the 3 of you that are renting this apartment. This might be similar to OU. You don't know Joe very well, but he was looking for a couple roommates. You and your friend said, hey, this is great. We can save some money and get this place. All right, so the first thing here, the what's described as the premise, will have the address. One thing you want to be careful of, so you can make little notes as I'm talking. This is my usually I like to draw on this, but I only have one extra, but I will go ahead and draw on this a little bit. So you guys can copy what I draw on some of the highlighted stuff. All right. So here, you've got a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single-family home. And one thing you want to be careful of sometimes is, is there a garage or shed? Sometimes the landlord will use the garage themselves as a workshop or something, and you're only renting the house. So you walk to the house, you're like, oh, there was a shed in back, but it turns out the landlord keeps some of their tools and materials out in the shed, so you're not going to have access to the shed. So make sure you ask those types of questions when you're doing your walkthrough of what's included or what's not included. And what you see may not be what you get if you're not careful. So the term of this lease, this one goes from May 1st to May 1st. That's actually pretty unusual. Sorry, put this up. So usually this will be April. So April 30th is more standard for leases. None of my leases run to the first day. Again, it depends, but just kind of watch that. April 30th means you're homeless for a day. If your new lease doesn't start till May, and this one ends April 30, that means you have to be moved out the day before, and you might be homeless for a day. Worse yet, you might be homeless for 5 days or something, because there was a landlord down up at Iowa State where I did lots of property management. They ended up ending their lease 5 days before, because it was always such a pain in the butt to do turnover with check-in, move out, painting, cleaning, all that stuff. So they ended their lease 5 days before, and that caught some tenants off guard, or they might have remembered on the first day they moved in, and then they forgot about it, and all of a sudden, okay, everybody has to be out May 25th, and they're like, what? Or April 25th, I guess in this case. So make sure you kind of look at the start and end times. Usually there'll be a time, like on my leases, I would have said noon. My lease says noon on April 30th. So not only that, some people start to think, oh, I've got the rest of the day to do the cleaning, and tonight my mom's coming in and she can help me clean. Be careful what time. And then, of course, all of this is negotiable. You can talk to your landlord and say, would it be a big deal if I moved out the next day, or if I stayed till 5 p.m.? But make sure you're thinking about that, or at least aware of it, especially upon move out. All right, lease payments. Real important here, where there's always an address on where you need to send your money to. So we got $850 payable on the first day of the month. So, is there a late fee? So now let you guys look on the sheet. And the second page, some of you have 2-page ones, the other, you guys have the 1-page. I forgot to double-sided when I made my copies. Is there a late fee? Yes. Where'd you find that? What number is that on, or where is that? Other terms. So at the bottom here, at the back, tenants shall be charged $35 for each check that's returned. That would be for a NSF check that we talked about a long time ago. For any payment not made within 5 days after its due date, tenants shall pay a late fee of $50. So circle that, 5 days. That's a fairly common one. Our property management company up in Iowa, we stopped doing that because what we found is, I think we worded it that it was due by the 5th. With no late fee would be assessed. It's due the 1st, but if you pay by the 5th, there's no late. Guess when everybody pretty much paid the rent? That's it. And so we're like, well, this is dumb. We want our money sooner. We had mortgage bills to pay, other operating expenses. So we just changed it to it's due first, period. And then we had a per day late fee that kind of built up after that. So and again, it's something that we might relax if there was circumstances associated with it. But we always like to have our tenants bring it in on the first and just get them doing that. Usually they can. It's just a matter of timing. All right, security deposit, and then I'll open it up for questions. So the security deposit is sometimes a mystery for people. At the time of signing this lease, tenant shall pay the landlord in trust a security deposit of $850 to be held and dispersed for tenant damages on the premise or other defaults in this agreement, if any, as provided by law. Security deposit will be returned within 15 days after the receipt of the new tenant's mailing address. Most tenants do not provide their new mailing address unless they were there during the checkout. And so this would allow the landlord to either be a little late until they got the new mailing address, but they're under no legal obligation to figure out where you moved. So that's kind of a standard thing. In Iowa and Kansas, it's 30 days. It is by law. So this, I don't know where this was drafted, if that was by law or not, or this landlord just happened to do 15 days. But you're not going to get your deposit back right away when you move out. So another thing that tenants often think is like, okay, good, I got my deposit coming and I really need that money. So you move out on the 30th and then you're already got your hand out on the 1st to your landlord, can I get my deposit back? Maybe the landlord will be able to do that if you've been a great tenant and there's no issues. But otherwise, it might take some time to estimate cleaning, to get the actual cleaning charges, or if you put a hole in the drywall to get that repaired. My tenant who's moving out now busted some of the pipes downstairs, so then shut off the water. When I turned the water back on and fixed the pipes, the toilets weren't filling. And so I'm not really sure what that is. I think there might be just some junk in the lines, but I've got a plumber coming out the next couple of days to look at that. So anyway, the law allows a little bit of time to get the bills settled, and then the landlord is responsible for providing a list of, if you didn't get your full deposit back, why. So there has to be line itemed out. A lot of people think, oh, you can just keep my deposit. Well, if your damages for the apartment, and this tenant is pushing it, I'd say, I haven't quite estimated it, I have a $1,000 deposit. But between the dog damage, the $300 door, $200 sublease fee, I'm already up to $600 pretty fast. And she did some cleaning, but it wasn't a full clean. So we'll see. I'm going to do my move-out inspection later this afternoon. And so I'll provide a detailed list. But if there was $1,400 worth of damages, and she has a $1,000 deposit, she's going to get a little bill from me for $400. So you are not, my point with all that is that you are not limited by the amount you paid for deposit. And it's like, oh, I'm going to trash the place, so screw it. Landlords, just keep my deposit, I'm out of here. If you did $2,000 worth of damage, the landlord can send a bill for you, and then furthermore, take you to small claims court. So we did that too, to get a judgment. Remember when we did the credit report, and you could have a judgment on your credit rating? Well, that's how it could happen. All right, questions or comments so far? Okay, so now that I got to the judgment stage, you guys had it agreed out that you were, so you got John Doe, oops, that's me, Joe Public, you and your friend. And so Joe was paying $350, and you and your friend had the smaller bedrooms or something, and so you were paying $250. So the $850 rent was paid like that. Let's just assume. So go ahead and put these numbers down. That was your sharing arrangement that you had. Some landlords may want you to pay with one single payment. Other landlords will take, little bits from each person. So that's just something to be aware of too. But when it comes down to the $400 worth of damage that Joe punched a hole in the wall and trashed the carpet with had a party one night and had the, tropical aid Kool-Aid with vodka and everything, and it spilt on the new carpet. And so there was a big stain, and to replace that carpet alone was about a $900 carpet replacement. So when the landlord has $400 left over, who do I get to go after? All three? Do I have to find all three? I actually just have to find any of you three. Or better yet, the one that I think's got money. If Joe's a loser and lives in California, and you guys stayed in Ottawa, and I know that you or your parents have money, or one of you drove a BMW, like we talked about in the car insurance chapter, I can just sue you. I don't have to find Joe. Of course, I had nothing to do with your relationship with Joe, right? So all I have to find is one of you. Same thing if Joe skips town on the lease. So it's a 1-year lease. Joe says, I'm going back to California, college isn't for me, and leaves 6 months worth of rent, and you guys weren't able to find a new roommate, and it was really Joe's rent. I can sue any one of you for that if I can't find Joe. That's the way leases work. So you got to be careful with your roommates. It's possible for leases to hold different people responsible for fractions of the rent, but that's very unusual and usually not done because a landlord doesn't want to have to figure out going after one person or the other, right? It's you guys who decided to live with each other one way or the other. So, so that's something to be aware of. So you are all jointly and severally liable. All three are 100% liable for the apartment, both the rent and damages. So that's what I want you to add on to here. All three are 100% liable for rent and damages. That is usually a surprise to most college students, but that is the way the law works. So choose wisely when you have a roommate. Be careful on utilities is another area that can be a problem. So you put the utility, hey, Joe and best friend, I just got the utilities hooked up, we're all set, right? Don't really think much about it. But now the utilities are in your name, and come January, we have a $300 heating bill, and Joe skedaddled town maybe, or doesn't have the money to pay utilities, and your friend is struggling too. Guess whose credit that goes in? You, and that's your bill. So with utilities, be kind of mindful of that. Have a game plan in mind of how you're going to share the utilities. If people start contributing early, and then you keep a pot of money, some people do all kinds of things. So there's just things to be aware of that utilities, especially in the wintertime, can get, and especially in an old house, right? So a lot of times college students are getting into, oh, this is great, it's an old 5-bedroom house, so our rent's only going to be, $250 a person, and then they have their first $600 utility bill, and they're like, whoa, okay, well that was going to be up there with the old furnace and the no insulation of the walls. Okay, so questions on that one? That one's a big one. So make sure you do some stuff like taking pictures when you move in is a good idea. So most landlords, so I give my tenants a move-in condition sheet where, let's say there's a little red stain in the carpet in the room right there. And it's like, well, the landlord decided, I'm going to charge you a fine for the stain, but I'm not going to replace the carpet. So now you come in, you want to make sure you document that the stain was there when you moved in. So obviously today's day and age, snap a quick picture is one way to do it. Make sure you save that somewhere in your files. But also on a move-in inspection sheet, you can say a 5-inch red stain. So you could be really specific. This is kind of related to the security deposit. So let's kind of tie a thing here. Move in condition. Be specific. Example, 5-inch red stain in northwest corner of second bedroom. And you can write this right on your sheet, right on your lease or on your sheet, but you want to be that specific so that you don't get all of a sudden the landlord forgot or didn't do good paperwork themselves. And so when you ended up moving out, you're like, oh, 5-inch stain, that's going to be $60. And they're like, wait a second, here's the paper that said that was here when we did it, or of course the picture, or both. Okay. So let's move on here to possession. So tenants entitled to possession on the first day of the term and the last term, unless otherwise agreed. At the expiration of the term, tenant shall move his good and effects and yield the premises to the landlord in its good condition when delivered. Ordinary wear and tear accepted. All right, so this one says expected, but it can be with the exception of ordinary wear and tear. You know, that usually takes a judge to determine what that is. If the landlord tries to ding you for the carpet because it's, you know, there's a wear pattern or something, and it's like, oh my gosh, you guys totally trashed this. Was it wear and tear? Which means if you're normal, anybody who was living there would normally have created it. Maybe it was cheap carpet that the landlord put in at the beginning, and so that wear pattern would have been there anyway, something like that. So. But in general, most landlords, you know, are going to be okay with this. If you, I don't know, had maybe a slight mark on the wall or something that was real subtle, and you didn't like, you see how this is kind of a little bit smudgy, dirty. That can be just after years of wear and tear. Landlord comes in, and it's actually been 5 tenants that have lived there, and they say, oh, we're going to repaint. I'm going to charge you for repaint. You know, should it be your bill? It was kind of built up slowly over time. So that I have seen landlords try to pass painting off to the tenant. Like, I'm going to paint this tenant moving out, but I'm not going to charge her for that, or at least in the one room, because it was there when she moved in, and it was just kind of 4 years. It's been a while. It needs a freshening up. So I'm going to be repainting it. So you do have this provision that is always in the lease as well. Any questions there? All right, occupants. No more than 5 persons may reside. So 5 is quite a few. One thing to be aware of is in some cities, there can be ordinances where you can only have 3 people in a house, even if there's 5 bedrooms. So I've seen quite a few college students get stung on this one too. They rent a 5-bedroom house. They maybe don't even talk to the landlord completely about how many people they plan on having there. And so they end up putting 5 people in. The neighbor calls and says, there's like 5, 6 people. I don't know how many people are living there. And the city comes out and sees that there's more than 3 people, or in this case, it's a 5-bedroom. Could you put a 6th person in there? Probably, you know, depending on if there's a den or, you know, a boyfriend, girlfriend are using the one room together. So you can have a 5-bedroom house that might have 6. So make sure you're aware here, but also there could be city ordinances. So some cities have maps also. It might not just be the landlord's policy, and the landlord might have put this down because that is the max in the city. So there's kind of 2 things going on between the landlord. And then there's just, the reason I want to bring some of the stuff is that sometimes there's people like, oh, I'm just going to buy a house and rent it out, right? And they're an unexperienced landlord, don't know the city rules, and they didn't get it through the city or approved with the city. They just bought a house and they're renting it out. Lots of homeowners, when the real estate market is really hot right now in Ottawa, but when it's not so hot, oh, I took a new job in Tennessee, let's just rent out our place while I'm gone, right? And so then they start renting, and they don't know any of the rules or the local ordinances. I've got 5 college kids there, but only 3 are allowed. So make sure you, some of that falls on you to make sure you know what you're getting into as well. All right, pets. Pets shall not be allowed without prior written consent of the landlord. If you get it, this particular one wants an extra 100. That's a pretty dumb policy. That doesn't even get you to first base with the amount of damage. I usually do a double deposit if I don't have good references on a pet, or if it's a puppy or something. Or sometimes I'll do time and a half, so it's $1,000 deposit. I'd ask for $1,500. Plus, I have my $25 per month pet fee. So kind of be aware of that. And just because you have one pet doesn't mean that you can have multiple pets. So usually landlords are pretty cautious on the pet department. All right, questions on this page? Is this informative for you to get to this level of detail? Because this is stuff you guys need when you go off campus. I mean, it's usually, again, something like, hey, let's go get an apartment. And then we just, where do I sign? I sign right here, and I paid my money, and I'm done. All right, maintenance. So landlords shall have the responsibility to maintain the premise in good repair at all times and perform necessary repairs to satisfy habitability. Tenant will be responsible for light bulbs, monthly heating air filter, lawn maintenance. We could add snow if we're in a state where there's snow. So always ask, like, what am I responsible for when you're doing that first walkthrough? You know, do I have to do this or that, or is this your responsibility? Batteries for the smoke detector. That's another thing. All the smoke detectors are trash. They were brand new 4 years ago. The first beep that comes out, you know, they're undoing the smoke detector, taking out the batteries. But nowadays, they're all connected. And so it'll still beep even if the battery's not in there. And so then they're beating off the fire detector with a broomstick, and those things aren't cheap either. So all that kind of stuff goes on. And really, especially in an old house, that's a dumb thing to do. I know the smoke detector can be irritating sometimes, but older houses are going to be a little more prone to potential fire too. And so those smoke detectors do save some lives. I've seen some situations where that was true. All right, utilities. There's usually going to be an itemization of what you have to do, but gas, water, and electric. So here in Ottawa, water and electric come together in Ottawa, and then you have the Kansas gas service for natural gas, if you have a natural gas place. If you do have electric heat, it's expensive. So sometimes, here's the thing with electric heat, it's cheaper to buy up front, but it's higher operating costs. So guess what the landlord has incentive to do? If it's cheap at the purchase, electric heat is cheap to buy at the purchase, but it's just the monthly bills are more expensive. What might some landlords choose to buy? The electric heat. Like, guess who gets stuck with the utilities bills? You do. Right? So then, like, the incentive system's kind of destroyed to spend a little bit more money up front. Most of them are natural gas here in Ottawa, but if you get rented electric heat, you can call the utilities all the time, anytime, for a year-round average. Make sure you do that. Don't trust what either the landlord says. The landlord's probably not going to know exactly anyway, or the old tenant. Oh, I think they're averaging about $75 a month. That's fine, but call and check themselves, because if it's the summertime, they might be thinking what the summertime utility bills have been and kind of forget, oh yeah, that one time in January it was $400 or something. So make sure you get a year-round average. So you're always able to get, let me just kind of put this down here. Get year-round average from utility company. All it takes is a phone call. So call your utility company. You give them the address. It's not private information, so it's not like they're giving up. But you can do this for any property in Ottawa, even my house. You guys can learn what my year-round average is. You give them my address, and they'll give you the year-round average. So that's always public information on how much utility bills are. Okay, questions or comments there? All right, defaults. tenant shall be in default of this lease if the tenant fails to fulfill an obligation in which they're bound, like changing the light bulbs. Technically, I'm not going to throw you out, but not changing the furnace filter, you're in default of the lease. And I'll talk about remedies on how that gets repaired, but technically you're in default. You can cure the default. So if a tenant fails to cure, this is the legal terms now, if the tenant fails to cure any financial obligation within 5 days after written notice of such default is provided by the landlord to the tenant, landlord may take possession of the premises without prejudicing landlord's rights to damages. Tenant shall pay all costs, damages, expenses, including attorney's fees suffered by the landlord by reason of tenant default. So this one kind of keeps it short. There's two things that go on notices to cure. So this one's kind of referring to you didn't pay your rent. So how does the eviction process look like, right? So the landlord tells you, you didn't pay your rent, you're out of there Friday. They're lying, usually. So most states do tend to allow the landlord to get a non-paying person out within 30 days. Most states, that's not true. And COVID, there's been exceptions for that. But usually I can get somebody out in 15 days up in Iowa. So you serve a notice. So let's say it's the 2nd and you haven't paid your rent and you've been kind of a deadbeat tenant anyway. I serve you a notice that you haven't paid your rent and needs to be paid within 5 days, or I'm going to proceed with eviction. I give you 5 days, 5 days ticks by, you don't call me, you don't pay. Now I go to the courthouse and file to have a court hearing, in small claims. Then the court gets set a judgment date, usually like within a week or so, 7 to 10 days. We have our court date. You get served official notice that you are to appear in court. Landlord and tenant go before the judge, and it usually goes like this. Have you paid your rent? No. Did you provide the paperwork, landlord? Yes, here's a copy of my paperwork. And then the crying starts. Oh, my sister died, my baby's dying. And the judge will say, sorry, you're out. You have to find someplace else. So the judge is not there to like learn your story. They'll usually cut tenants off of that. So I've been in the courtroom many times on eviction. And as long as the landlord knows what they're doing in terms of following the law, then whatever your story is doesn't really matter. It might buy you a day or something. The judge is going to say, you have to be out, you've got 3 days to be out. And then I'm going to send the sheriff over there. The sheriff doesn't help you move your stuff out. The landlord's responsible for emptying out the place, but the sheriff is there to keep the peace. So if the tenant and the landlord are fighting with each other, the sheriff is going to be present just to keep the peace. And otherwise, tenant and landlord are going to kind of haul stuff out to the curb by law. So even if it's January, even if there's food or whatever, everything has to be brought up to the curb. And then the tenant, of course, would have the option to come get the stuff at the curb. If it stays at the curb for a day or two, garbage man comes and takes it all away. That's the eviction process. Any questions? Don't get evicted. You can do it, especially doing the budgeting stuff. That's why we're here. But that is the process. So this is the legal process that needs to be done in order to really get to the point where you're thrown out on your butt. It really doesn't ever happen, by the way. We didn't come to the point where we had to haul much stuff out. People were usually gone or abandoned the place by then. So it usually doesn't get to that point. But there's been a few cases where it's gone to that point. Access. So subject to the tenant's consent, landlord shall have the right to enter the premise, make inspections, provide repairs, show the unit if it ends up being that you're moving out, to bankers. In the case of an emergency, landlord may enter without the tenant's consent. During the last 3 months of this lease, landlord should be allowed to display a for lease sign in the yard. So that's kind of standard stuff. This varies from state to state, but in Iowa, and I can't remember, I just kind of followed this rule of thumb, it's usually a 24-hour notice. So the landlord can give you notice, or of course, if they say, hey, would you care if I come in tomorrow at 1 o'clock, that's giving consent to be there. But otherwise, your landlord shouldn't be showing up out of the blue unless it's an emergency. I mean, if there's something going on, then that can happen. So that has a little bit on tenant rights. Questions there? All right, so that is our lease. You guys can fill in these little questions here that we just did. How long is the lease binding? And we can kind of, what's that? Yeah, off their date. Yeah, this is just for 1 year. Just put 1 year is the lease is binding for 1 year. Oh, no name. Is that yours? We had it turned in. We still got okay. All right, so keep the lease one today. Keep the lease. And well, I'm going to have you turn in the other sheet that I passed out. So make sure your first name, last name's on that. Watch video number 2 on your own, and tomorrow we'll pick up on real estate investing, looking at mortgages, all kinds of fun stuff related to real estate.